Hello and welcome back to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech and tech conversations into one place. I'm Dave Rome, Senior Tech Editor for Escape Collective. Joining me this week,
Ronan McLaughlin, losing my voice.
Oh no.
Hopefully it holds up for this.
It's alright, it's just a podcast, you don't need it.
Yeah, cool.
And I'm Zach Edwards of Boulder Gruppetto.
Very nice. Alright. Still in Girona land?
I am still.
Nice.
Last week.
Okay, all right. And you've just told us that it's the first day that you've seen the sun. So we're going to try get through this quickly so you can ride a bike for the first time in weeks. Ride a bike without getting soaked. So
yep.
Funny story, Dave. I very almost booked a trip to Girona to go and say with Zach's trip to do some aero testing, and for whatever reason I didn't in the end up. But I was going to go there presuming the weather would be good for it, and it hasn't stopped raining since Zach got to Girona.
Basically.
It's all Zach's fault. Anyway, all right. Well, as usual, we've got plenty to get through this week. But yeah, I think we'll just keep you guessing as to what all that is, and we'll kick right into it. Top of the list, and one of the more interesting things for me as far as what I think is genuinely useful and isn't going to cost people an arm and a leg because it's free to use, Vittoria has joined the game of tire pressure calculators, like an online tire pressure calculator. There's some interesting things here, but yeah, I mean, basically, I'd say generally speaking, it's very close to the likes of what we already have available from Zip and Silka, and more recently Wolftooth, where you basically put in your weight, your riding conditions, the type of tire, and the width of tire that you're using, and it spits back a recommended tire pressure. And having a play with it, I haven't done too deep of a dive on it, but at least for road pressures, it's sort of for me it's spitting out pressures that are directly in the middle between Zip and Silka recommendations, so kind of almost like the average of both of those, which is interesting. So yeah, it's right around what I would choose to use. But Zach, you were saying you had to play with it and it told you something a bit surprising.
Yeah, I've been just playing with it a little bit, and it seems like mountain bike and gravel are more or less kind of right where I would run, but the road seems like 10 psi higher than what I would prefer.
Yeah, okay. For me, it kind of feels like it's potentially missing a trick. And I say that because it's the first tire manufacturer. Zip does do some tires, but not their bread and butter. It's the first tire manufacturer that we've seen enter the space. And I kind of think that there's probably opportunity to do what we see with suspension on mountain bikes, where you put in the serial number of your suspension fork and it brings up every service guide related to that suspension fork. It tells you every single detail you could ever want to know, including a setup guide specific to that suspension fork. And I kind of think, as a tire manufacturer, I think they maybe could have gone a step further and let you put in a serial number off the tire, or Zach, you said there's a QR code on those tires, and that then removes a lot of the guesswork out of the questions it's asking, and it knows exactly what tire model you're on, and then it spits out, even, assuming that QR code's linked to it, or even know the width of tire you're on. Maybe it just needs to ask the inner width of your rim, and then at that point you would probably feel like you're getting a much more tailored pressure. But thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, so the tires currently have a QR code on them, and I think just pulls up just like a kind of owner's manual type of thing, like don't run pressure above XYZ, and maybe it'll change that, which would be kind of a cool thing. But at the moment, yeah, like it would be cool if you said, okay, I'm running a Corsa Pro Control and a 30 mil tire. This is my weight. Tell me what it should be at. Where this is, it kind of asks what casing you're on, like which level, whether it's a race tire or a training tire, but it doesn't get more specific than that.
But I'm excited by that idea. I kind of think there might be a future here where each tire manufacturer maybe has one of these calculators that is actually like this Vittoria, that's kind of scientifically driven, that can give you model-specific pressures. But yeah, Ronan.
That's scientifically driven. I want to delve into that, but before we do, like I agree, Dave. It's like there are a lot of variables you have to input here, a lot of selections you have to make on the Vittoria calculator, which I quite like it. Like it asks you what type of bike, it asks you if an e-bike, the type of tire, the size of tire, how is it installed, like do you have it set up with a tube, tubeless with no insert, tubeless with an insert, and then it asks you like how do you like the tires to feel on you, like supple or reactive,
Mhm.
And then the obvious ones like rider weight and that. And, there are some sort of questions as you're working through it, specifically around the tires and that, where you're just like, well, if I had the option of just selecting one of Vittoria's tires, considering that, this is for Vittoria tires, it just seems like that would make much more sense. I did notice that it didn't ask me about the rim I was using as well, which, I don't want to, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole again, but I think it is sort of an important consideration these days.
Yeah. I mean, the difference between running like a 17 or 19 mil internal width rim versus like a new 25 mil width internal rim, it's going to be a massive difference in pressure.
Funnily enough, I actually did some tire testing last week, and I wasn't using a Vittoria tire, so you've got that caveat. But I did basically what I was doing was like running different pressures within one tire size. So I was using a 30 mil tire, tried it at 75, 60, and 40 psi. And from the testing that I did, and I'm not prepared to publish the results because I'm not prepared to stand over them that much as of yet. I'm still working through that. But from what I found with the 30 mil tire I had on the smooth asphalt that I was riding on, 75 psi was my optimal pressure. And on the Vittoria calculator here, it's telling me 60. And it was very, very close between the two, but I just found that was an interesting coincidence that I just tested this, was able to then compare it to the findings that I had. And that might get into actually some of the questions that Vittoria's asking. Who do you want it to be supple? Do you want it to be reactive and that? But it brings up a question I've always had about these, is like, do we think they're spitting out like the fastest tire pressure you can use, or because I think that's what we assume with a lot of these tire pressure calculators, but what do you think the actual...
I think there's a big enough variance in which one each recommends, and it also is so variable based on like what you deem to be the conditions that it's asking for. Like, it often asks you to set your surface, right? All of these calculators ask that question, and it's like sometimes I think Vittoria actually goes a step further and actually provides photos of what each surface looks like, which is quite a cool feature. Like, kudos to them on that. But I think for me in a ride, I'm thinking like the surface varies quite a bit. So, what might be optimal for 20% of the rides, probably, maybe in a different category for other parts of the ride. So I think there's a lot of variables here, and I think end of the day, they just have to give you a recommendation that is kind of in the ballpark with being safe and perhaps knowing it's not going to cause you to pinch flat the tire into the rim.
I think too, like, what's optimal for me might be different optimal for you, like, and Ronan. Like, Ronan wants optimal speed for rolling resistance, but maybe I want optimal traction for cornering on a downhill or something, right? Like, those are two different pressures. So it's kind of about finding that balance that kind of makes everyone happy.
Which is what I like about the Vittoria calculator here. It has like, again, it has, do you want a reactive tire? Do you want a supple tire? Do you want a balanced tire?
Right.
I think that we could have like better ways of describing
always
those.
Balance.
It has speed, grip, and balance. But
yeah, I know I selected balanced for mine, but it's worth noting, like, in playing with this, and I have been working on an article on this topic, of the whole topic of tire pressure calculators. I'm giving away plenty to our competition that do listen, but I found the wolf tooth calculator, while really good off road, they've recently turned on road settings, and it 20 psi variance between the wolf tooth pressure calculator recommendation and the Silka for my road pressures. So I mean, at that point, you may as well just use your thumb again.
I think the biggest benefit of these calculators is like that initial getting us to appreciate that maybe our tires should be lower than what we used to pump them to. And, Silka did already get us thinking much lower. How much lower you want to go will vary from person to person. But that initial, like, the low hanging fruit for tire calculators has sort of been already picked. And we do now see all these different tire manufacturers creating their own calculators. And I know of a couple more, or at least one more, that is working on their own pressure calculator as well. And it kind of seems like maybe it's just something they have to offer now, rather than actually there being a need for it. And as such, if they have to offer it, if they're going to go to all this while they're doing it, and remember, Vittoria has that Vittoria Park testing facility, which I would love to go to sometime and check it out. But they have the option there to maybe go a step deeper than others can. Again, that just gets me back to, I think, if we could just select from the tires that they offer rather than the sort of somewhat subjective options that we have at the moment.
I just had a funny thought with the wolf tooth pressure calculator recommending 40 psi for me in a 30mm tire. Do you think they're just trying to sell more of the in-case mini pumps, which are just, probably only capable of 40 psi if you gave yourself a hernia. So, yeah, it's a palm-sized mini pump, but no. Anyway, where were we with that?
It's funny though because it's not even if you input different sizes in these calculators, it does change the results quite a bit. I just give the example of it sort of suggesting a pressure that may be lower than what would be the fastest pressure based on my rough testing last week. But I also tested a 40mm tire last week. Shock news, not faster.
Nope, you're incorrect. If you've seen Instagram, Ronan, you are incorrect. You're clearly of old information. You're closed-minded. You just need to open your mind while you're testing this, and it'll be faster.
I've seen a lot of incorrect things on Instagram, Dave. I don't know. I might stand by my guns on this one. What I was just going to say though is so the Vittoria calculator suggested a pressure lower than what I would have arrived at if I relied on my testing. If I also relied on my testing for the 40mm tire that I tested on the same day, the Vittoria calculator recommends a pressure 15 psi higher than what I found to be the fastest for the 40, which was still the slowest of all the tires I tested.
You're giving me so much to look forward to in these teasers. I look forward to hearing more about this testing once you get some more numbers to it.
Yeah, I mean it's I look forward to doing the testing and talking about the testing, but it gets back to what you mentioned earlier. It's just so variable. Rider to rider and surface to surface variable that my concern is that someone listens to what I just said and goes, "Oh, 40mm tire is the slowest." And, put it on Pirate Bay cobbles. It probably isn't the slowest anymore, but put it on perfectly smooth tarmac that I was testing on. Yes, it kind of
just is. Like a Phillips screwdriver. It's not one fits all. Sorry, I just had to link that back to tools somehow, even though the reference hardly works. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, it's worth reiterating, we're looking into this topic, we're actively looking into it, more than one of us is looking into it. I think it's worth noting that these pressure calculators are really good. We encourage you to use them just because chances are you probably are running too much pressure in your tires. And these pressure calculators will probably get you much closer to the right pressure. But yeah, I mean, the variables are so great that I think what we're seeing for now, and certainly what, Ronan, your testing is showing is that what works for one person is not necessarily right for the next. And I'll just add a quick little geeky thought onto this, which is even if you're being pedantic about what the pressure calculator says, you're probably not using a gauge good enough to actually use the pressure that the calculator is giving you. You need you should be using a standalone gauge or a known good gauge that's connected to like a digital gauge or a really good analog gauge that's connected to a newish floor pump or maybe an electric inflator if you've been reading Threaded as of lately. They're pretty good, but yeah, I think if you're using an old floor pump at this point, like an old Toe Peak or an old design analog gauge, then I mean you're going to get close to within the next closest 20 psi in my experience. So I think that's worth noting. But anyway,
I think this is the topic of gauges is something we're going to be touching on again in the near future.
I think so. So anyway, I'm sure its number will come up. With that bad pun out of the way, let's move on to something that's has I feel like I'm being selfish with these, but it has been on my mind. And why it's been on my mind is at the time that you're listening to this, SRAM would have just released its newest mountain bike groups, which is basically a mechanical version of transmission. So transmission came out, it was wireless only, part of the Axis line, and most notably it used the UDH, the Universal Derailleur Hanger interface. Turned out that was a Trojan horse for directly bolting a derailleur straight to the frame. And SRAM have gone ahead and removed the UDH and bolted that derailleur in place, and now they've come out with this mechanical version which sits at a more affordable price point. So these new mechanical groups are designed to replace the company's existing NX and GX mountain bike components. I'm not going to go into detail on that because if you're on the Geek Warning podcast channels or if you're in the Escape Collector podcast channels, you'll probably already be aware that we've got a deep dive with product managers from SRAM on this very topic. So if you'd like to know more, check that out or head to escapecollective.com. We've got a pretty our usual pretty big deep deep dives into group sets. Whenever there's new group set, we like to try cover it in more detail than most. So yeah, I encourage you to check that out. But looping back around, why this is on my mind is that I actually think we're in a day and age of modern bikes where there's now significant barriers to good mechanical shifting based on frame design. And I think this is, yes, these parts are on the mountain bike side. I think this applies to all disciplines at the moment, like any sort of performance-oriented bike that isn't running old school cable routing. Zach, have you seen this in the market?
I mean, on the road bike side, basically no bike is good with mechanical shifting these days.
Yeah.
Like some you technically can do it, but the amount of bends and stuff that have to go in the housing, it's just not feasible to expect it to actually work well. Or let alone like servicing and replacing the cables, anything like that. But mountain bike side, I would say less so, but more and more bikes are going with internal routing, which I would say is less internal than the road side of things. So it's still doable, but not maybe ideal.
I seen this on the run sheet, Dave, and I was confused as to what year we were in, because as far as I'm aware, mechanical on the road side is that there was an extinction event in 2021 that basically killed.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't like, I guess my point is like not to return to the very, very dead horse of through headset cable routing, because we've done that. Like we've had that conversation, but I mean that's definitely a factor here. But yeah, this introduction of like this pretty nice mechanical transmission group and seeing what is pretty obviously a lot of people really asking for this, I think it just sort of raised my eyebrow a bit, being like, a lot of frames aren't good with this. Like the bike I put it on, a Cannondale Scalpel, really lovely frame. You can actually get the mechanical shifting to work well enough because Alan Hafferty won all sorts of things last season on a Cannondale Scalpel with mechanical Shimano XTR. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's just not optimized for mechanical shifting. Like that bike is really good with wireless, and then putting mechanical cable through it feels like you're bending in compromises into your shifting. It's just, there's a lot of tight turns.
It almost feels like these new group sets should have came out like one product cycle ago. Like all the frames now, all the companies are like, everything's electronic. We don't really need to think about this anymore. Where the previous generation of mountain bike frames had the option to do mechanical and do it well as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, like, based on some of the conversations I had with SRAM, that it's like there was almost this like lack of communication between drivetrain manufacturers and frame manufacturers, and for a while there, perhaps frame manufacturers thought genuinely that the drivetrain manufacturers were all in on electronic. And
I mean, that's what it seemed like.
Yeah, and they started progressing their designs that way, and then all of a sudden, they've kind of reversed it, going like, oh, hang on, we can't make electronic group sets cheap enough to satisfy the mid-range or the lower level market, so we're going to have to innovate mechanical, and now you need to make frames that work with it. And we're kind of in this weird spot where I think a lot of manufacturers are like, oh, it's not ideal.
Dave, can I just give me 1 second here to put on my tinfoil hat? Okay. Is it that they can't make mid-range cheap enough, or is it if they make mid-range cheap enough and also competitively weight-wise that they then cannibalize their premium sales? And so we add all this weight to the mid-range stuff that differentiates it from the premium stuff, and then that's
quite a large tinfoil hat.
It is, but I mean, I just look at some of this mid-range and lower entry-level electronic drivetrain and electronic shifting components, and they're sometimes like
I mean, there's I mean, and we're seeing that with this transmission mechanical, like it's very close to the GX Axis group that sits above it, but to help bring the price down, like it's the same crank arm, but then they've put a cheaper spindle in it. They've changed the alloy bolt to steel, and they've changed the aluminium chainring to steel, and then it's like, I think it's like 70 something grams heavier as a result of that. And the whole group is only 90 grams heavier. So it's like all the weight is in this different crank.
SRAM has always been doing that though, where it's like, we're going to take essentially the same stuff and put some different hardware and maybe a different pulley cage on it and call it a different tier.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a new thing, but I do think, going back to the mechanical thing, like I think it's, for me, I think we're in this weird time where all of a sudden, like, SRAM released Apex 12-speed in mechanical, which is actually a pretty good group set. But a lot of bikes had already moved beyond being able to run it as well as it should be. Like, the cable runs were no longer that smooth. The cable runs were going through the headset.
Yeah. It was just such an afterthought.
Yeah, and yeah, Shimano still produces good mechanical stuff, but I think we're at a point where maybe frame manufacturers need to really think about, do we differentiate our mid-range products more clearly from our high-end? Because at the moment it feels like they do the high-end bike and then they try to make the mid-range product or the low-end product look just like the high-end bike, even though it's priced to run mechanical.
Yeah. Like that was, I feel like Scott was the biggest like initial offender of that, right?
For
With
sure.
their road bikes.
Yeah.
There's another pro and a con to that, though,
Go on.
in that we can't all
Yeah.
afford the premium stuff, but we kind of like a look of it. And like what's the alternative? If we, I know you guys are talking about bikes, but if we just, take that to the group set and take the road examples, like quite often these days, the entry level and the mid range stuff will look like the premium stuff. There'll be a different finish on it, but like feel wise and design wise, other than the finish, it'll look similar. And that wasn't always the case. Like way back in the day, the mid level and the entry level group sets would have looked very, very different and felt very, very different, which is arguably more important. And at least now, if we can't all access the premium stuff, at least we can get the ergonomics of it or the look of it. And that kind of gets me, like, it gets back to my earlier point. It's like, how else do we differentiate this unless we add weight? So the price is one differentiator, and that has to be by definition of entry, mid, and premium. And if we want it to be ergonomically the same, which, we should all be able to have good feeling levers, regardless of what we pay for them. How else do we differentiate it other than to add weight? And what I always find myself wondering is, like, do using these other materials that do add weight really result in that big a cost saving? Because sometimes the cost savings are significant. And you're kind of wondering, like, how much of it is a cost saving and how much of it is just like a profit grab on the ultra premium stuff, and it's maybe
potentially.
I mean, I guess so you're like, Dave's more talking about like the frame difference, right? Like everyone should be able to have good product that look nice, but like, do you want to sacrifice shifting because we've taken this frame and made it look like the top of the line one, but now there's a cable that goes through it, so like it looks great, but like it shifts absolutely terrible after a month of riding.
Yep.
And that's not really fair to that consumer.
No. And that's, I think it goes back to a point that we've probably made in this podcast a dozen times at this point, so I'm sorry for laboring and repeating the point, but I think there's still brands that could get this message, that need this message. Is that, I guess what I'm asking for is, if you're speccing a bike with mechanical shifting, then please put some thought into how to optimize it for that mechanical shifting. Because it does feel like a lot of brands at the moment are designing bikes for electronic shifting and then secondly figuring out how to get a cable path through it.
I was just going to say, it's interesting because like when bike companies first started running shift lines and stuff inside the down tube, like semi-internal, not through the stem and the fork and everything, but just like through the down tube, through the chainstay. Like initially, shifting was terrible. Like companies did a really, really bad job at it. And then over the next like maybe 2 product cycles, they really got it dialed. Like shifting was great. Like it was hidden, but like still serviceable and still easy and still shifted well. And then with everything going through the stem, it seems like everyone's just kind of like forgotten how to do that with the lower end bikes. Yep. It's just like thrown out the window. And now they're like, wait, how do we run housing through this? And like, oh, we'll just run full length housing and just shove it through everything. And then we've like back to where we started, where it's just terrible.
I'm just going to sit over here and play devil's advocate throughout this segment. or I don't know, maybe I'm defending the manufacturers here, but like you walk into a bike shop or even just talk to riders, most want internal cable routing.
Yeah, no, totally. No one's arguing that.
It's actually,
but does that customer, like 6 months down the road after buying this bike, do they regret their decision when it doesn't shift well?
I mean, I'm not disagreeing that we maybe should regret those decisions, but I don't think in the most case, at least the riders I speak to do, because they've got a bike that looks really, really nice. And that's the key metric, right there wrongly for.
dealt with so many people that like get these super bikes, or whether it's a high end one or a mid range one or a low end one, and then like, yeah, they own it for 6 months or a year or whatever, and then it's time to service it, and it's like, this is actually like much more complicated than it used to be. And then they're like, what are you talking about? This is like the best bike on the market. It cost $12,000. It shouldn't need all of this. And you're like, actually it does, because they've made it look like this, and that's what you want. So like, A comes with B.
Yeah, there's more plastic and less sealing in this than there ever was in your previous bike.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we're going off topic and we're getting dangerously back into just ranting about headset cable routing. But which is kind of related.
It's all connected.
It is all related. But yeah, I guess to summarize, is like what I've been thinking about with having tested this transmission stuff is that I'm really strongly of the opinion that your group set choice should be, if you're choosing between mechanical or electronic, you need to be perhaps involving a mechanic if you're not one yourself, and really thinking about the practicalities of how many bends the cable needs to go through for a mechanical shifter in the given frame. If you're on an old frame, like an old steel frame with external routing or just through the down tube, it's going to be sweet. But if you're on a new bike with maybe headset cable routing, or maybe it's got a convoluted junction between the front and rear triangle, if it's like a full suspension frame, I think that needs to go into the consideration as to whether you're going mechanical or electronic. I think it's no longer about what you think feels the best, or whether you love the feel of manual or whatever it is. I think it's like the frame dictates what you should be using.
I like, you two guys are both mechanics, and you will be having these conversations, a lot more often on a daily basis than I will have in a year probably. But I think it's as much about managing expectations, in that, if we want the good looking bike, then acknowledging at the moment that might come at the expense of shift quality. And if we want shift quality, then I think you guys need to acknowledge
that doesn't happen though in the real world. Like the bike shop just wants to sell the bike. They don't care.
But I mean, I do think both of you having to work with these things on a daily basis, you're kind of at the other end of the spectrum where you just want to not have to.
No, I'm not. I don't think that at all. Like, I don't really mind that it's more complicated, but there's like, when someone gets upset because this bike that they bought isn't as problem free as it could, like they think that it should be.
That's what I mean about we need to manage expectations. It's like, if you want this thing that looks this way, understand it's going to come with more complexities. And that's, I don't think we can really get it. Like the example I have in my own back catalog is, like, I've got a Willier 110 Air in 2020, which was fully internal cable routed, and then I went with a mechanical group set because it would be lighter and the frame was compatible. But the shifting was just, it was 12 speeds Campag mechanical, and so that's already like, it has to be perfect. And putting it on all our bikes, that same group set was perfect, and I could never get it run perfectly on the fully internal setup.
Yeah, and that's probably a point I didn't make very clearly, is that we're in a day and age where the more speeds added to the back, the more sensitive the shifting is to adjustment and to cable health and to bends. And then on top of that, we're in a day and age where frame manufacturers are increasingly not giving a damn about how many bends that cable has to go through in order to get to the derailleur. So you've got this like shifting that's more sensitive than it ever was before, and frame routing that is significantly worse than it ever was before, maybe barring like early Cervelos that went behind the stem. I just think it's like this compounding number of issues. And I guess where I'm walking away from this thinking is like, there's always going to be variables and unknowns if you're running mechanical, and it's going to be based on the frame you're putting it on, and even the size of bike you run. Like if you're on an extra large frame, your shifting's going to, typically I'd say, is going to be worse than someone on a small frame, just because it's a longer length of cable. Whereas electronic has none of these issues, is where I'm kind of landing. It's like, I'm not trying to say electronic is for everyone, but I'm seeing some pretty significant benefits in modern frame design for using electronic shifting. All right, well, let's. I think we've solved that. I think that conversation is done. I think every bike from here on out is going to have perfect cable routing, and we'll never have to have this conversation again. So yeah, good job, team. I think it's time for a PSA, and this PSA came to me just today, and it actually coincides with something that, again, I'm working on, just to give the heads up to all of our competitors listening. Hi, everyone. And I think, the PSA comes from Aaron, who, is a mechanic at Chase Cycles in Winchester. And his PSA is just a reminder for everyone to stop buying Shimano components from eBay, Amazon, and AliExpress. They may be real, but it's not worth the risk. And he has based that on sending me photos of disc brake pads, L05F, 5A pads, the Dura-Ace finned Shimano Road disc brake pad. Pretty hard to tell, but yeah, a customer had brought in fake pads, and I've seen these delaminate before. I've seen like the whole brake pad just completely shear off the backing plate, and it's terrifying. It's not worth it. And yeah, anyway, I'll let someone else talk for a second. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen fake chains and pads, so definitely don't recommend using those.
My question is it just chains and pads, or does this extend to other, like,
it's a lot of things,
like cassettes? I'm assuming can be done as well. But like, if you buy a DI2 shifter off AliExpress, surely that's not.
I would think that's getting into the realm of like. So I would have 6 months ago, I would have said no way would that be fake. It'd be way too complicated. Who's got the time for that? I have since had confirmation of fake Ultegra carbon pedals in the market, and they're good enough fakes that, from what I heard, Shimano themselves couldn't immediately deny warranty on them because they had to serial number check them and everything. But they had failed in an unsafe manner, and then upon checking, they're like, we didn't make this product. So there is some terrifying fakes out there that I think are in categories that you wouldn't associate as being worth the time to make a fraudulent copy of. Chains is definitely the most common one I've seen. Like the HG 901 11-speed Dura-Ace chain seems to be like the most widely copied. I have a few sitting here for reasons, and more to come on that one. But ironically, the fake ones have holographic authentic stickers on them, and the real ones don't have the authentic sticker on them. So yeah, I think it's just a good reminder. I bought a few fake chains thinking they're fake, but they weren't that cheap. You know, they're plausible pricing to be real. I got one from AliExpress and I got one from eBay. Both are confirmed fake now. So I think the PSA is a good one. I think it's just safer just to assume the risk is too high and it's not worth buying Shimano components and other big brand components off Amazon, eBay, AliExpress, and other potentially non-legitimate sources. Support your local bike shop, and if you can't, then support the cycling specific online retailer.
Hey, if you buy the fake cranks, it could be better.
Yeah, the difference is I guess if your fake cranks turn out not to be better, then there's probably no recourse on that one.
Yeah.
So you've probably lost a calf in the process.
That's the question though, is like, if you do buy a Shimano group set from AliExpress and it is a genuine one, do you have recourse if you have a warranty issue with those? I think that's another.
I honestly can't give a definitive answer to that. I truly believe it depends on your region that you're in and your local laws. I think some countries require companies to support international purchases for warranty, regardless of place of purchase, as long as it's their product. And I think other countries are just like, if it's not bought within our borders, other countries and companies, some companies have this policy. It's like, if it's not bought within our country from a official dealership, then there is no warranty for you. You have to send it back to your place of purchase. So yeah, I think it varies place to place. I'm not gonna. Yeah, I had heard some brands were pretty generous with their warranties before. They're like, yeah, if someone bought this from Chain Reaction Cycles in the UK, we'll warranty it locally if there's a problem. Like, we just don't want faulty product in the market. But I can also, think of a dozen brands that had the opposite of that, where their way of supporting the local dealer was to basically say, you have to buy it from our local dealer. So, yeah, I mean, Zach, what have you had any experience on that side of things, like having to try warranty stuff that came from questionable sources?
I think most of the time, as long as it's real and they have a receipt and it's within the warranty period, then there's no reason to not.
Yeah, but yeah, the story of fakes and counterfeit products is something we're continually working on and looking into elements of it, and I'm actively working on an element of it. And I think for now, the safe bet, the safe statement is just if it's a big desirable brand or a big popular brand, then just buy it from a reputable source. And unfortunately, Amazon, eBay, AliExpress are not reputable sources for buying big brand products. Time and time again, they're just marketplaces. They get their money regardless of whether it's real or not. They don't really care. I think, yeah, Amazon and especially AliExpress have shown time and time again they don't really care about IP law until they have to. So I think, yeah, support those that are likely to have the real products. And if there's a big price difference, then chances are that big price difference exists because one product is real and one product is not. So anyway, one to come back to in future, I think. All right. Well, let's move on. We've got some quick tech bites to get through. We're just weeks away from Seattle now, so we're starting to get more and more new product releases. Top of the list, obviously, SRAM Transmission Mechanical. I'm just going to send you over to all the other content we've done on that. We've got plenty on it, so I'm not going to cover that in more detail. They have also, SRAM has also completely overhauled its mountain bike brake range. Basically, they're not doing dot fluid mountain bike brakes anymore. Like they're done. So yeah, they've moved all in on mineral oil, and they've got a bunch of new brake models as a result of that. Again, we've covered that in the podcast in the other special bonus episode of the podcast. We've got it on a Sketch Collective. So yeah, head on over there for details of that. Plus first ride impressions of the new Motive sort of traily inspired cross country race brake. So it's quite a cool product.
Don't tell me the answer, but did you ask SRAM if mineral is coming to road also?
Yeah, I got a no comment. Can we take that question out of the podcast? We actually, Josh Weinberg and I, Josh is our new tech hire out of the US. We did discuss that topic in like the kind of member only section of that SRAM podcast. So the chat with SRAM is free for everyone, but then when Josh and I talk for another 20 minutes after that and sort of share what we think and answer a few more questions, that is member only. In that, I pulled out the crystal ball and basically hinted that it wouldn't make sense for SRAM.
Don't tell us we have to listen to the podcast.
Oh, okay. All right. But yeah, I think it's coming, but not yet. Next on the list, bad things happen to Komoot. Ronan, do you have like the basics of this that you can share?
Yes, Dave. Basically, Komoot, the sort of mapping and routing platform, has been acquired by Italian technology firm Bendy Spoons, which previously taken over companies such as like Evernote and Meetup and WeTransfer. And yeah, it's not been going down too well. DC Raymaker over there, who we've had on this podcast previously, he had sort of looking into Bendy Spoons and some of the large layoffs that they've had in the past at companies that they have acquired previously, and looking into what that might mean for Komoot.
Yeah, I think they have as a private equity firm, they have a history of dismantling the core of the businesses they acquire. So yeah, it's one we're looking into. I believe Suvi Loppinen on our team on the tech side has been looking into this to do a bit of a follow up into what this might mean for the brand. But yeah, I guess thoughts go out to everyone that was on a call that doesn't really know what the future looks like for their employment. So yeah, hope everyone lands on their feet. It's a pretty scary one. So shift gears a bit. Bianchi is celebrating its 40th anniversary. They are widely known to be the longest running bicycle company. And yeah, I think it's to celebrate. They've got a couple of new editions. 140 limited edition painted versions of their two premium road bikes. And yeah, I think it's cool that they're basically that their previous time trial bike made it to 140 years that it had lasted since their inception as a company. So
I thought you were going to say they were going to do a limited run of one-off good-looking bikes.
Oh yeah, I think. I mean, I'm not going to defend for a second the praying mantis of their Aero road bike, but some of their bikes are quite nice now. So they have had some misses though in recent.
I think they've just changed direction, and that sort of what we all think of as Bianchi doesn't really. Those two things don't really line up.
Yeah, they're definitely pushing they're definitely unique. It's not my preference of design language, but they still have some nice looking bikes, and thankfully, yeah, some of the uglier bikes have been superseded. So, but yeah, happy birthday to Bianchi.
To be fair, like I think we're talking about the Aero race bike and the Arcade X gravel bike, was it?
The previous generation, yes.
Yeah. Whereas like the new Impulso RC gravel race bike, like that kind of
looks good.
That is a good looking bike.
Yeah, and the Specialisma, the previous generation of Specialisma, I'd say look better than the current, but the current one isn't. It's not a hideous bike. I don't think it's the prettiest bike in Bianchi's history, but it still looks like a pretty nice bike. So yeah, we don't mean to always pick on Bianchi, but yeah, happy birthday. Let's move on.
You just spoiled it for them. It was happy until it was a happy birthday until we brought it up.
Yeah. Anyway, jumping around a bit, we've got some new mountain bike tech coming out. Fox has had a busy few weeks, the suspension specialists, and they've really overhauled their suspension lineup. So last week you heard Josh and I talk about the new 34 SL, which is a new cross-country platform, and it sort of filled this gap in the market of like this lightweight 130mm travel fork for this new wave of like these downcountry light trail mountain bikes that didn't really have a perfect fork for them. Fox this week has released its new 36 platform that refers to the diameter of the stanchions. So there's a 36 SL, which basically kind of takes the spot of like the previous 34 fork. So it's similar weight to the previous 34, but longer travel, stiffer. It looks really nice. And then there is a new standard 36, which is basically a burlier version with longer travel and almost starts to overlap a bit with where Fox's Enduro inspired or Enduro focused 38 fork is. So those numbers will make no sense to people that ride drop bar bikes, but for the mountain bikers out there, check out Fox's new lineup. There's some cool overhauls. Keeping with their dampers that they released last year, which have some cool tech in them. So, Zach, is there a new Fox fork that has you thinking it might be time for a fork?
Yeah, I kind of like the 34 SL.
Yeah, me too. So that one, I've got an aging Ibis Ripley at home. That's I think that fork would be ideal on. So anyway. New bikes. We've got a new bike from Tern. So Tern's sort of a utility brand. They do some really cool stuff. The GSD is a cargo bike that is sort of like a short wheelbase, small wheel cargo bike that kind of fits in the spot of a normal bike, but has big capacity. And they've just updated the GSD. So these things are really popular. You see them around most big cities, and I know I've ridden them at numerous Eurobikes, and they're great fun and really, really practical. They've increased the weight capacity of them. They've changed the motor. It's still Bosch. They've now got like folding foot stands on them that can be used for carrying groceries or for passenger feet. There's all sorts of other little updates which look cool, including the ability to select one with Bosch ABS braking on it, which I think is quite neat. So I bring it up because I want one. Speaking of things that we want, Ronan, I think this one might be up your alley. Giant has just released a new bike that is using largely recycled composite materials. It has 3-spoke carbon wheels. It's just 2.5 kilograms, and it's got 44mm width tires.
This is the bike of my dreams.
This is the bike of your dreams. Of course, it is a balance bike with 12-inch wheels for toddlers, but I think this is cool. Carbon fiber, recycled carbon balance bike. Not the first carbon fiber balance bike we've seen. Specialized had one before, but theirs was kind of a copy of someone else's. But I think this thing looks cool, and I think the use of largely recycled or resourced materials, I think, could be a hint at where Giant might be thinking about going in future big bike models.
I was just going to say significantly better than just recycled tire levers.
Yep.
And I will say, it kind of does seem like a bit of a gimmick, a carbon balance bike. But having watched a kid go through the balance bike phase, the low weight of something like the specialized hot walk carbon, it actually does make a difference.
It does, yeah.
And so I had a whole load of balance bikes in for a group review back in Cycling Tips days, and there were like we had a daughter. We have a daughter, and we have a daughter, and you would like. I mean, I think the natural assumption based on all the things that she's interested in is like, oh, she's going to go for the pink bike, or she's going to go for the pretty bike, or the frozen bike, or whatever. But she just
turns out she's your daughter, and
she kept reaching for the hot walk carbon because it was the fast bike, as she described it at the time, and it was lightweight and easy to pick up. And that, I think that's the key thing here, is like lightweight, easy for them to lift and ride on, and then also things like proper tires and that. These things do make. I don't think it's worth $1,000 for the short use that they get out of it, but if it is an option for them, these sorts of things, it's not just a gimmick, I'll say.
This one's not cheap, I think but it is cheaper than that. I think it's 900 Australian. I haven't seen the US pricing, but that would probably put it around the 600 US point. So, still a lot of money, but very cool. So
yeah, I mean the hot walk carbon as well. I think I'm exaggerating. I think it's about £600, but the one feature that you haven't mentioned about the giant one here, it's got a striking resemblance to the Trek Madone, I thought.
Does it have a hole in the seat tube?
It has a cutout on the seat tube, but I don't know. I didn't actually see any mention of like compliance or anything like that. But
yeah, I wonder if it's only more aero with the integrated bottles. So anyway, all right, let's I think that's a cool, fun little bike. So kudos to Giant for that, and yeah, kind of keen to see where that recarbon or R-carbon that they're calling it goes for them as a company. Whether I think this might just be a little bit of a test phase on a bike that's small enough to probably never get broken. But yeah, it'd be really cool to see where that goes. I have no doubt they're looking into it. So, all right, well, that's all the news. That's what's been on our mind. I think it's almost time to get to Ask a Wrench. So if you're on the free feed, then this episode is about to come to a close. If you like Geek Warning, then please support it. Join Escape Collective, share the episode with friends, and enjoy everything that we create, including many, many podcasts that we believe are worth your time if you love cycling and love cycling tech. Speaking of good content that is worth your time, I'm just going to give a plug because Suvi has been really busy on a carbon fiber feature lately, and I think it's a really interesting written piece into some of the marketing fluff that surrounds the carbon fiber world, and it's sort of a piece detailing on why things like Fact 9 versus Fact 10 or OCLV or advanced carbon and all these things are kind of just typically marketing names that are largely just nonsense. So I think it's a good piece that goes into detail on why all that is, and I think she's probably working on a podcast too about the topic, so one to watch for.
Does she get into carbon soles that were 10 out of 10 stiffness and are now 15 seemingly out of 10?
No, that's not in the scope of the piece, but I think that's a really good one to get into, is how you can have a shoe that is 10 out of 10 stiffness but is less stiff than a 14 out of 10 now. So good point, Ron. One for us to investigate. We'll put all resources into this. All right, before we say farewell, for those that maybe are members of Escape Collective or thinking about being members of Escape Collective and aren't yet on the member feed of our podcast, just a reminder that the only way to listen to all of our podcasts in one single channel is to be a member, but you can also just elect to be just members of the Performance Process podcast or just the Geek Warning podcast as well while you're a member. And a new feature we've just added is that our member-only pods are now available on our website. All you need to be, you just need to log in and head to the podcast page, and you can actually listen to the full episodes from that podcast page now. Basically in the top right-hand corner of the menu of the website, go to podcasts, and you'll be able to listen to the full episodes there. This is handy because unfortunately we're still unable to have our member-only podcasts available to people that insist on using Spotify. All right, so with that, it's time for Ask a Wrench. For those that aren't likely to stick around, I'm just going to let you know you're about to miss out on Brad Copeland and myself answering questions about Specifically, we go pretty deep and detailed on talking about optimizing bike setup for Unbound, specifically answering questions related to best tire selection and chain prep for racing for that sort of distance. And yeah, Brad, it's worth noting that Brad Copeland's now the head of specialized factory off-road racing, so he's thinking about this stuff for riders that are trying to win that event. And he shares some tips that what they'll be doing. We chat about chain lines and whether it's something you can mix and match or whether you even need to worry about it. And we have a question about fixing peeling stickers. Big things. But useful. Anyway, all right. With that, thank you, Aaron, Ronan, Zach. Good to see you. All right. Until next week.